How could you do this? This painting is my breakdown, not your masterpiece.
It's sold for $1 million, Mother. It is art.
My daughter sold my pain for $1 million and called it art. She locked me away in a shed like a shameful secret while she sipped champagne with the elite, parading my life's work as her own genius. She thought I was too old, too broken, and too far gone in my grief to fight back. But she forgot one thing. I am a master of my craft, and on the night of her greatest triumph, I made her masterpiece speak with my voice, stripping away her lies in front of the entire world. It wasn't just an exhibition. It was the final, coldest lesson I ever had to teach. I spent 40 years restoring stained glass in cathedrals, breathing life back into shattered colors. But when my wife, Martha, died in that rain-slicked intersection 3 years ago, the light went out of my world. I retreated to my workshop, a dusty sanctuary smelling of lead and linseed oil. I wasn't losing my mind, as my daughter Claire told her wealthy in-laws. I was surviving. I was building a monument to Martha, a massive, intricate glass installation that captured every letter she ever wrote me, hidden within the patterns of the light. The betrayal didn't stop with a few stolen sketches. Within a month, Claire had woven a web of lies so thick I could barely breathe. She had married Julian, the son of the Sterling family, people who owned half the galleries on the East Coast. To them, I didn't exist as a father. To them, I was a tragic family burden. I found out through a neighbor who showed me a glossy society magazine. There was Claire, dressed in silk, standing in a marble hallway. The headline read, "Claire Sterling, channeling the madness of the muse." In the interview, she spoke about her eccentric father with a tone of rehearsed pity. She told the reporter that I had suffered a complete mental break after my wife's death, and that I had become prone to violent outbursts. She claimed she was my sole caretaker, keeping me tucked away in a private facility for my own safety. She wasn't just stealing my work, she was erasing my humanity to make her story more dramatic. She told her in-laws that she spent her nights in my, quote, guiding my trembling hands to help me find peace through art. In reality, she hadn't called me in weeks. She used my isolation as a marketing tool. She painted me as a madman in a cell, so that when she unveiled her art, the world would weep for her burdened soul. I sat in my workshop, the magazine trembling in my hands. The woman in the photos wasn't the daughter I raised. She was a stranger, using my dead wife's memory as currency. She had convinced the Sterlings that she was a saint for dealing with me. Every time she visited and threw money at me, she wasn't helping. She was paying for silence. She thought that because I lived in the woods and wore stained overalls, I was too simple to see the game. But I've spent my life looking through glass. I know exactly how to spot a crack before the whole structure shatters. And Claire was starting to show some very deep cracks. The realization hit me like a hammer to a pane of glass when I saw the advertisement for the 9 exhibition. It wasn't just my sketches anymore. In the center of the promotional poster was a photograph of my Window of Tears, the very piece I had labored over for 14 months, pouring every ounce of my love for Martha into the lead lines and the hand-blown crimson glass. Claire had stolen it from my workshop while I was in the hospital for a minor heart scare 2 weeks prior. She had told me her movers were taking it to a professional cleaning facility because the workshop was too dusty. I had thanked her. I had actually thanked my own daughter for robbing me blind. Seeing it now, labeled as Sterling's masterpiece, felt like a physical blade in my chest. She hadn't even changed the title. She just stripped my name off the frame and replaced it with her own. I called her, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and disbelief. When she finally picked up, there was no guilt in her voice. Quote 13, she said, her tone cold and dismissive. Quote 14, I whispered. She snapped back. She hung up, leaving me in a silence that felt heavier than the lead I worked with. She thought she had me trapped. She thought my grief made me weak. She was wrong. My grief was the fire that was about to melt her world down. 2 days after our phone call, Claire's sleek black SUV pulled into my gravel driveway. She didn't come to apologize. She came because she was desperate. Her elite in-laws had demanded a quote 19 for the exhibition, a centerpiece so massive it would fill the gallery's main rotunda. She had the sketches she stole from me, but she didn't have the skill to build the structure. She needed my hands, my kilns, and my 40 years of experience. She said, stepping into the workshop and covering her nose from the smell of solder. She tried to sound sweet, but her eyes were calculating. She handed me a set of blueprints. They were my own designs for a sculpture that used angled glass to create moving images on the walls. I asked, looking her dead in the eye. I wanted to see if there was a spark of humanity left. She lied, not blinking. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. I realized then that Claire didn't see me as a father, but as a tool, a biological machine she could switch on to manufacture her success. "I'll do it," I said quietly. I saw the flash of triumph in her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully manipulated the broken old man one last time. But as I touched the cold glass of the frame, I wasn't thinking about a television or her approval. I was thinking about the hidden layers I was about to bake into the very heart of her. I was going to give her exactly what she asked for, a show the world would never forget. I worked 18 hours a day in the heat of the kilns, but I wasn't tired. For the first time since Martha died, I felt a surge of electric energy. Claire wanted a masterpiece? I would give her a Trojan horse made of glass and light. While she was busy attending gala dinners and bragging about her creative process, I was perfecting the technical trap. The secret lay in the chemistry of the glass coating. I used a specific silver nitrate solution that looks perfectly clear under normal gallery spotlights. However, when hit by a specific frequency of ultraviolet light, the kind used in high-end security or specialized display lamps, the silver reacts and reveals whatever is etched beneath it. On the surface, the panels showed beautiful, swirling clouds. Beneath that surface, I etched the truth. Screenshots of her bank transfers, photos of her stealing my journals, and the harsh words she'd written in her emails calling me a senile old relic. But I didn't stop at the visual. My old friend Marcus, a retired sound engineer, helped me hide a small, high-fidelity wireless speaker system inside the heavy oak base of the installation. It was disguised as part of the structural support. I programmed it to activate via a remote trigger on my phone. Claire visited once a week, never staying longer than 10 minutes. She would glance at the progress, check her makeup in the reflection of the glass, and remind me not to be, quote, 31, quote, with the lead lines, she would say before rushing back to her world of fake smiles and expensive wine. She never once looked at the detail. She never noticed that the I was creating were actually QR codes integrated into the design. To her, I was just a laborer. She was so blinded by her own arrogance that she couldn't see the man she called broken was meticulously constructing the cage that would soon lock her out of her own high society life forever. The day of the grand opening arrived. Claire had the installation moved to the Sterling Gallery by a team of professional art handlers, but she didn't realize I had already visited the building the night before. Using an old maintenance badge from my days as a contractor, I had slipped into the gallery's basement. I knew the electrical layout of these old buildings like the back of my hand. I quietly swapped out 2 of the main spotlights above the rotunda for the ultraviolet bulbs I had prepared in my shop. To any security guard passing by, I was just another tired old man in a gray jumpsuit, fixing the lighting. On the evening of the gala, the street outside was lined with limousines. I arrived at the service entrance, carrying a heavy toolbox and a ladder. I wore my most stained work clothes and a grease-smudged cap pulled low over my eyes. I was the invisible man. In a room full of tuxedos and silk gowns, a maintenance worker is practically a ghost. Nobody looks at your face, they only see your utility vest. I stood in the shadows of the upper mezzanine, looking down at the rotunda. The centerpiece was draped in a massive velvet cloth. Claire stood next to it, looking radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my workshop. She was laughing, holding a glass of champagne, and leaning into Julian Sterling. Her father-in-law, the patriarch of the family, was introducing her to a famous art critic. "My daughter-in-law is a visionary," I heard him say through the earpiece of my radio. "She's captured the very essence of human fragility." Claire beamed, soaking up the praise like a sponge. She looked so confident, so untouchable. She had no idea that I was standing just 30 feet above her, my thumb hovering over the activate button on my phone. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, righteous anticipation. She had spent months making sure I was hidden from her world. Now, I was going to make sure she could never hide from the truth again. I watched as the lights began to dim and the crowd fell silent. It was time for the show to begin. The atmosphere in the gallery was thick with anticipation. The wealthiest donors in the city stood in a tight circle, their eyes fixed on the velvet-draped monolith in the center of the room. Claire stepped onto the small podium, the spotlight catching the diamonds at her throat. She looked like royalty. I watched from the maintenance balcony, my hands steady on the cold iron railing. I could see Julian, her husband, looking at her with a mix of pride and awe. He truly believed his wife was a creative genius. "Tonight is about the beauty of the broken," Claire began, her voice smooth and practiced. She had a microphone clipped to her dress, and her words echoed perfectly through the hall. "My work, The Cathedral of Light, was born from the deepest tragedy of my life, the loss of my mother and the subsequent decline of my father. I spent countless nights alone in the studio, breathing life into this glass, trying to find a way to honor the memories that haunt us." I almost laughed out loud. She spoke of solitude and hard work, while I was the one who had burns on my forearms and lead poisoning in my blood from the weeks of labor. She painted a picture of herself as a grieving daughter turned artist, a saint who found beauty in the wreckage. The audience was mesmerized. I saw women dabbing at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. The Sterling patriarch nodded solemnly, already thinking about the prestige this exhibition would bring to their name. Claire's hand reached for the cord to unveil the piece. "I present to you my soul," she whispered dramatically. The velvet cloth slid away, and for a moment there was a collective gasp of genuine wonder. The glass was breathtaking. Even I had to admit, under these lights, my work looked like a miracle. The way the colors bled into each other was perfect. Claire stood there, basking in the first wave of applause, her face glowing with a triumphant, ugly pride. She thought this was the end of her journey to the top. She had no idea that I was just waiting for the applause to die down before I flipped the switch on her reality. The applause was deafening. Claire stood before the shimmering glass, arms outstretched, absorbing the adoration of the elite. Critics were already whispering words like revelation and masterpiece. I saw Julian squeeze her hand, his eyes shining with tears. Claire leaned into the microphone one last time, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "This piece represents the silence of those who cannot speak for themselves," she said, looking toward the cameras. "It is my voice, my hands, and my truth." I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, my thumb resting on the screen of my phone. I felt a strange calm. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about balance. Claire had spent years building a tower out of other people's bricks, and it was time for the foundation to give way. The Sterling family sat in the front row, the very picture of high society grace, unaware that their family name was about to be linked to the biggest scandal in the city's art history. "You want a voice, Claire?" I whispered to myself. "I'll give you one." I signaled the hidden speakers first. A low, rhythmic humming began to pulse through the room, subtle at first, then growing in volume. The crowd looked around, confused. Was this part of the immersive experience? Claire looked startled, glancing toward the sound technician, who was frantically shaking his head. She tried to laugh it off, gesturing to the glass as if the sound was coming from the art itself. "This is the heartbeat of the work," she called out over the noise, her voice beginning to crack with a hint of panic. But the hum didn't stay a hum. It began to sharpen, turning into the distinct sound of a voice. My voice. The recording I had made in my workshop just 3 days ago. The room went dead silent as my rough, tired voice filled the rotunda, echoing off the marble walls. The audience froze. Claire's face went from triumphant gold to a sickly, pale white. The trap was sprung, and there was nowhere for her to run. The rotunda fell into a chilling silence, broken only by the sound of my recorded voice. I pressed the second button on my phone. Suddenly, the main gallery lights flickered and died, replaced instantly by the harsh, violet glow of the UV lamps I had installed. The transformation was violent. The beautiful, abstract clouds on the glass panels vanished. In their place, glowing like radioactive ghosts, were the hidden layers. The crowd gasped as high-contrast images appeared. Screenshots of Claire's texts, where she called her husband a, quote, 54, and her in-laws, quote, 55. But the worst was the center panel. It showed a crystal-clear video loop, projected through the glass, of Claire in my workshop, laughing as she kicked my wife's old journals into a trash bin while shouting at me, "You're a nothing, Dad. You're just the help." "Turn it off," Claire screamed, her voice cracking. She lunged for the power cables, but I had secured them with industrial locks. She turned to the crowd, her face a mask of terror. "It's a hack. This is a prank. This isn't part of the art." But then the audio switched. It was a recording of the conversation we had 3 weeks ago. "People with real taste are coming, Dad. You wouldn't want to embarrass me with your presence." The elite audience recoiled as if they had been slapped. The Sterling patriarch stood up, his face turning a deep, furious red. Julian backed away from Claire, as if she were a venomous snake. I stepped out from the shadows of the mezzanine and walked to the railing. I pulled off my maintenance cap and looked directly down at her. The UV light hit my face, making me look like a vengeful spirit. "The art is finally honest, Claire," I said into the house microphone. "You wanted to show the world shadows of loss. Well, here is the loss of your dignity, your marriage, and your lies." The flashbulbs of the press began to fire like a firing squad. She had wanted to be the center of attention, and now, as the world saw the monster behind the masterpiece, she finally was. The shadows of loss had finally come to light, and it wasn't her name they were chanting. It was the truth. The aftermath was swifter than I expected. The Sterling family, obsessed with their reputation, filed for Claire's divorce before the week was out. They stripped her of the Sterling name and issued a public apology, recognizing me as the sole creator of the, quote. Claire tried to sue me for, quote, but her own recorded words and the evidence of her theft made her the laughingstock of the legal world. She vanished from the high society circles she worked so hard to enter. Last I heard, she was working a back-office job in a city where nobody knows her face, far away from the galleries and the champagne. As for me, I didn't stay in that dusty shed. I sold the Cathedral of Light to a national museum for a sum that allows me to live comfortably for the rest of my days. But I didn't buy a mansion. I bought a small, sun-drenched studio by the coast. I spend my mornings watching the sunrise reflect off the ocean, and my afternoons teaching young apprentices the art of stained glass. My hands are still stained with lead and ink, but my heart is light. I finally finished the memorial for Martha, and now, when the sun hits the glass, I don't see grief, I see peace. I proved that you can't build a future on a foundation of stolen pieces. Looking back at the ruins of my daughter's career, I wonder about the cost of truth. I lost a daughter, but in reality, I had lost her to greed years ago. I simply chose to stop pretending. Did I go too far by humiliating her in front of the world? Or was it the only way to stop a predator? Was I right to do what I did? Or should I have just let her have her moment and walked away? What would you have done if your own child tried to sell your soul for a seat at the table? If you enjoyed this story of justice and the strength of a father's resolve, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing your perspectives on these difficult situations. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible story of truth and revenge. The end. Thank you for listening.